There's really only one thing we can control in this life, only one thing, and that's our reactions. So when we accept responsibility and stop blaming circumstances, the world, our upbringing, etc., then we start to really be very earnest about our practice, right? What it is to do our homework. And then things like plant medicine, ego death, and existential crises, they don't have to happen under plant medicine, but they happen, it seems, more on plant medicine percentage-wise than in regular everyday life because we really don't make the space for it. We're always just running around chasing our desires and distracted. But for example, ayahuasca, 5 or 6 hours, you're on the medicine. You can't get off that train. You're on that train. You're forced to work.
Welcome, tribe. I'm Maya Rose.
And I'm Gerald Rogers. We're about to embark on another mind-expanding episode where we dive deep into the realms of psychedelics, sex, and the superconscious.
This is a transformational experience of healing, manifestation, increased clarity, flow, and alignment.
So join us on this sacred journey as we receive the codes of transformation from scientists and psychonauts, shamans, tantra masters, mystics, and more.
Together, we'll unravel the secrets of plant medicine, sex magic, and other tools to tap into higher states of consciousness.
So why are we here? To answer the call, to share our passions, and be advocates for alternative healing.
So get ready for a ride that transcends the ordinary and leads you to the extraordinary, because living a legendary life is not just a choice.
It's a sacred adventure. Welcome to another epic episode of Psychedelic Sex and the Superconscious, and I'm so excited to introduce you to Gene Healy. He's a new friend of mine, and we've had some inspiring conversations, and we welcome you into this conversation as we dig deeper into this idea of psychedelics and how we can use intentionally these practices of mindfulness to activate our higher mind to help us show up more powerfully and inspired in life. And Gene is... He has a background in acupuncture and is a doctor of Oriental medicine, and he's worked with 70,000 patients through the time of his career in over 9 countries. And so it's really exciting to dig into your wisdom, Gene. And I know you've been practicing yoga and meditation since the mid-90s, and for last 7 or 8 years, you've been really exploring plant medicine as a tool for that. So I would love for you to just take a moment right now. What's alive in your heart in terms of what you want to share with our people as we begin this conversation in terms of who Gene Healy is and what you're up to in the world?
Who am I? Wow. You're asking the big metaphysical question.
Who are you? Let's just jump into that. At a cosmic level, who is Gene?
Well, that's a very strong Zen question. So when you look at Zen Buddhism, they often use what's called koans. Koans are kind of like a little Zen riddle or a puzzle that, if focused on, can help kind of unlock the truth of these questions, like who am I? So in Zen, they also say that you don't really find answers. What you do is lose questions. So this idea of who we are, for me, I'll speak for myself. When I was a little boy, I was in America, and I was very interested in the Christian church. I liked it very much, and I thought about being a pastor. I was really into it, and I was in kind of deep woods, Arkansas in the early 70s. So me being an Asian guy, and also at the same time, we didn't have much money. We were quite poor. So it gave us some difficulties, so it gave me difficulties to overcome. And that shaped my personality a little bit. But the thing about the church is that it's an inclusive process. So I was in church, but as those things shape your consciousness, one of the, I think, primary programs of all human beings is this idea of worthiness. Are we worthy of love? Are we worthy of social acceptance, etc.? So with my complications of being different, racially different, and financially compromised, those actually put extra weight on this question of worthiness, and that informed how I saw and appreciated Christianity. A lot of the early Christian stories that I was reading were like martyrs who would sing praises to God as they're being boiled in oil. And I was 7, and I was thinking, I can't do that. I must not be worthy. That is too hard for me. So that did shape my worldview to a large degree for a while. And when I went to college, I started to explore other things. And I spent a lot of time studying Buddhism. And then I did a lot of practical practice with Buddhism. When I was in Asia, I spent a lot of time in temples, did retreats, explored those things. And this really fundamental question of who am I was kind of my main priority for about 15 years. And I thought about becoming a monk for a very long time, about 20 years. I did finally put that question to bed when I met my wife, and I went through some different experiences. And that question of should I become a monk or not kind of dropped, just like this question of who am I, this identification that we do, which what I see is oftentimes the bedrock of a lot of our suffering. If I am a half Korean, then if I identify with that, then it makes it complicated. When I'm, for example, in America, then who do I fit and how do I fit in here? If I'm a Democrat and I hang out with Republicans and we have ideological differences, then that can provide conflict if I identify with only one team. So this idea of who am I, that question did drop for me in a very big way and a large experience I had in meditation in Korea at one point. So I'm not, the Zen answer, not to confuse your audience, because sometimes you need a little bit of a framework to understand. So like in Zen, they would do things like hit the floor, or cryptic things like show a finger, or give a kats, like a shout, ha! When someone asks a question like, who am I? To kind of show the fundamental emptiness of that question and the fundamental emptiness of identity. So none of that satisfies your listeners or yourself. I gave a little back.
I'm so glad I asked the question just because of that answer. I love that because at the core of the work that we do, I call it identity work, just like this process of exploring, because the story that we have of ourselves, the story that we've built through our life is like what limits us, to our current experience. And it's the unwinding of the identity that opens up possibility, the reinvention. And the reinvention can only happen when we let go of the story of who we think we are. So I really I love hearing your thought process as you're answering that question, because it's beautiful. And I think one of the greatest gifts of plant medicine for me is the capacity that it's had for me in unwinding some of the stories that have limited my identity in the past. And so and I like when it really comes down to it, this question of who am I, it's like trying to describe who is God, what is infinity, how long is eternity, it's like, of course, there's no way to limit that to like the vocabulary of words. I really appreciate that. I would love for you to share, because I know that you've been so deep in the practice of both Chinese medicine, but also meditation and mindfulness for a good portion of your life. How did your perception of life and reality begin to alter when you discovered plant medicine?
That's a good question. Plant medicine has been my recent obsession for the last several years. And if I were to look at the efficaciousness of those things and how are they useful to me and how might they be useful to others? So Chinese medicine is a very thorough system in and of itself. And it does things like it helps unblock us to let things flow as they should. We use words like qi, right, which can be loosely translated as energy, but it unblocks things physically, whether you have a muscular knot or an emotional tension. And then with that, we also do nourishment things like herbal medicine, which is often underappreciated. So we can think of it as a strong help for the body, but the body assists the mind assists the body. Okay? Meditation, of course, is more mind-centered. And then once again, the benefits from that can assist the body and vice versa. Meditation for me, it didn't start off with mindfulness. I started off with more of a Zen-like practice where we were focused on the reality of what we are and what is existence. And then through that practice, there were certain experiences. So when you ask the question, who am I? Instead of answering that, it would be better to have a way for us to experience that. How could we experience the reality of who we are? And often that reality comes off through a sloughing off of who we are not. So when we think of who we are, most of the time people choose words and experiences. I'm a man, I'm an American, I'm a Floridian, et cetera, et cetera. We have all these labels, and we have all the experiences of our lives. But if you were to add all of those up, every single experience, every single genetic component, every single label that we have in our minds, societal structure, it feels incomplete. It feels like that doesn't eclipse the sum total of who we are. Just like when you talk about and use words like God is like talking about infinity or the sum total of all existence. Well, how can you put that in an equation? You can't add it all up. But when you subtract the false identification, you can actually start to experience a greater capacity for the whole. So that experience and working with those things through meditation was what I did for a long time, a couple of decades. But as we do that, sometimes there's limitations to meditation too, especially for maybe like a Western mindset, because the information that we get about meditation and these deep spiritual traditions is that we hit this point of enlightenment and it's all kind of good, right? We just need to kind of get this goal. So what I see in America and Europe when we talk about meditation is that word enlightenment has somehow been a little bit stripped from the conversation, where we start to talk about the psychological benefits of mindfulness, stress reduction, and things like that, which is all good and useful. But then we start to lose this spiritual component of what is the purpose of this life? What are we doing here, right? Not just making it easier for us to handle the experience of life, but what are we doing here? So with limits of meditation, sometimes people can use meditation as kind of like a shield. You can block out difficult circumstances. You can use it as a way to spiritually bypass. And you can create like a little island for yourself where things don't bother you as much. And then wonderful experiences like plant medicine kind of like shatter that shield, because whatever's in is coming out when you do the right dose of medicine. It's going to be hard to deny the truth of that if you have unresolved trauma, unresolved identification, unresolved desire. You just start to see it much more clearly. So I love the plant medicine process because of the expediency of it, how rapidly it kind of like breaks through the layers. But I also see dangers with it, because a lot of people do practice plant medicine, I would say in non-ceremonial settings, like recreationally, or just because they learn some things and stuff like that. And that's not good or bad. But when you are thrown into deep waters, if you don't know how to swim, it can be a complication. So I've had some complications when I was in college and I did LSD recreationally, and I was thrown into some deep waters and I didn't understand what was going on. And it was very difficult for me. So those were kind of scary things for me, what they call the prototypical bad trip, right? But now as I experience plant medicines, I do them ceremonially with trusted teachers and medicine people. In the West, we often use the word shaman, though they wouldn't refer to themselves as that. And then they can help guide us through many different practices. And I really particularly enjoy the study of these shamanic practices, because we're looking at a system and a worldview. So this is a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think what might be useful is if I gave you maybe a little bit of a description of my worldview. So
yeah, I would love to hear that. I would love to hear even like specific experiences of how, whether ayahuasca or another plant medicine has opened up that worldview.
Sure. So how I see the world through my experiences, I don't really want to, we can talk theoretically, but for me, it's not that useful. I can only really talk about what I know through what I've experienced, and that might connect with you. It might connect with your readers. Otherwise, we're talking about something that's just more of an idea and it's in our head, and we're going to have a little conjecture about it, as opposed to, does that feel true for us, right? Because this idea of intuition is basically just knowledge that we don't quite fully understand all the sources for, right? So if I were to say my worldview, I would say that there's a process of me being born, and I had my influences and I learned what I learned and I had my sufferings. And then I had little awakenings where I started to question my worldview, what I thought was real, the things that we were taught, the things that we believed. So as we question, the world becomes very confusing, and it can actually be very disheartening. We can have these existential crises, these dark nights of the soul, as we have this kind of like cognitive and emotional dissonance. We can't rectify competing worldviews. Like letting go of Christianity to embrace another worldview is one example. And then instead of letting go, in the future, there could be possible of an integration where you can incorporate as opposed to it has to be one way or the other. So started to let go of certain ideas about the world, did a lot of meditation, and started to experience what does it mean when they use words like emptiness. So emptiness is devoid of inherent existence. So instead of saying, I am this, it's more the experience of, wow, that's not really totally who I am. But if I'm not that, then what am I? This true questioning of that, this sincere, authentic, persistent questioning of who we are. And that gets through layers of psychology, layers of emotional blockage, etc., layers of identification and a bias in our thinking. And then, if you practice hard enough, you can get to kind of like the wall. The wall is the wall of consciousness, just as far as you can get mentally and rationally. And with that practice, if you stick with it, you can have that dissolve. And as that dissolves, the world floods in. The world floods in on its terms as it is. So in Zen, they use expressions like before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. And then with this experience of the world as it is, it doesn't necessarily mean for me that all of my karma, my inclinations, my habits were all snuffed out. So I did have a change in a lot of habits and a putting down of a lot of things that would be hurtful to myself and others as I started to see things more clearly. But it's funny. It's like if you have a Pandora's box and you were trying to open it your whole life. You didn't know what was in there, but you're like, I just got to get in there. I just got to get in there. Then when you finally open it thinking that all your answers are going to be in there, what you see spills out is everything. All of the stuff inside starts to spill out. And as it starts to spill out, the traditional safeguards, right? These ideas of right and wrong, yes and no. When those drop, then you're left with all these powerful energies of emotion and inclination. And if you're not in an environment to really work on those, if you're just kind of out in the world, it can be very difficult. For example, I know you've done many ceremonies, and you know how clean you feel after a ceremony, like a newborn babe, right? Then you go out into the world, and let's say you went out into New York City. You did a big retreat in the weekend in the middle of Manhattan. It's all quiet because you're inside a house. But then you go walk outside, and there's a million people full of all of their suffering, full of all of their anger and aggression. And you can feel it so easily. And then all of this tension that you experience, it's hard to integrate. So as I started to do plant medicine, it started to connect me to a different aspect of my worldview. So if we have human beings who are walking around mostly, ignorant. Ignorant isn't bad. It means not knowing, right? Not knowing what reality is on its own terms. And then I had an awakening to what reality is on its terms. But I still had all this stuff inside, unresolved. And I didn't know what to do with it. And then I had to come to the States. I had less community. I had to open a business, which is not easy for me, all these other things. Then you meet plant medicine, which really helps this underlying stuff, puts a lot of gas on it. to start to clean, right? One of the things I think that people don't talk about enough in plant medicine or in meditation or in any spiritual practice is this necessity to clean, right? We're cleaning ourselves physically, cleaning ourselves of our mental attachments, our emotional attachments. And then I move out into the world with a new appreciation. I'm a little cleaner, but also I'm starting to relate to, I don't know what to call these things, like shamanic aspects of this. They would talk about spirits, spirit realms, guides, ancestors, plant spirits, etc., and how they interact with us as human beings, and how they can serve us or hurt us, and how we can also use them to be of service to others, which I think is the greatest calling of life. So ignorance, awake to reality, clearing out the stuff in the basement, learning all of these new helps in life, spirits, etc., and starting to hopefully fold into service at a greater capacity.
I really appreciate so many points of that conversation. And I'm like, as you're sharing, I'm like reflecting on my own journey. And one of the things that you mentioned, as it relates to like when we step into plant medicine, it's interesting. People that haven't experienced it or they're very new, they're almost expecting plant medicine to be the shortcut to enlightenment, that there's somehow some magic key that's going to give them the answers to everything. And they're going to like instantly release all the garbage that they've been carrying through their whole life and release the trauma. But it doesn't work like that. It's a tool for greater awareness, so that in that consciousness, we can perceive our false ideas and beliefs of self, right? Like it brings to the surface some of those things, so that with that heightened consciousness, we can really start to question some of the ways that we've been being in the world. And I was thinking about the importance, like one of these ideas of identity is, oftentimes people talk about like in like large doses of medicine, this idea of an ego death. And like this like releasing of this attached identity that we have, which is called our ego, which is inherently where so many of the limits of our life exist. And I'm reflecting back to times in my life as I've done plant medicine where I've experienced that, whether through ayahuasca or through a heavy dose of psilocybin, or even through recently through a ketamine experience. And through an ego death, like I felt like I've been able to transcend this limited identity of me and experience me as a cosmic energy without beginning, without end, like stepping into like 5-MeO DMT experience or whatever, like entering like the eternity of my soul, right? Transcending this idea that Gerald exists within a body and feeling the infinite nature of who I really am. And then you come back from those moments, those journeys where you just feel so expanded. And what shifts inside of me in those moments is just like a curiosity of like why I create so many limits for my soul within this identity of Gerald, right? And then it just allows me to question. It's like, oh, wow, interesting. Why would I have these certain beliefs around money? Or why would I show up in these ways around relationships? Or why have I like been in these ways abusive to my body? like it just has allowed me to like really start tuning into what my infinite soul is calling to create and to let go of. But it requires like a very intentional energy of curiosity in order for the alignment long-term to happen, like the integration. And then I think the other thing that's happened to me in those like certain ego death experiences is I felt like I've dissolved some of the separation between me and the rest of humanity. Like all of a sudden, there was one particular experience I was doing the mushroom ceremony down in Costa Rica with some friends. And I remember being out under the stars, and all of a sudden my consciousness felt like I could feel what it was like to be a beggar in India. I could feel like what it was like to be a sheik in the Middle East. I could feel what it was like to be, in China. And like my soul could like travel and experience all of this diversity of humanity as though it was extensions of me, even going to the point where I could like experience what it was like to be Hitler and to feel that being part of my consciousness as well. And then feeling what it's like to be a Jew in the concentration camp and feeling that's an extension of my consciousness and soul as well. And it was just like this really expansive awareness of humanity and this idea of like, oh my gosh, there is a part of us that really is one with all things. You know, it's like going beyond the concept of it to like experientially like feeling what that means to be part of this like this entire human family and to feel like we're all, you know, appendages of the same being. I'm curious for you what this idea of ego death means for you, and if you've had experiences through your journeys that have like you've experienced an ego death.
I've experienced many, probably 15. They're scary. I
want to underscore that they're so scary because it's like you're releasing. It's almost like you're dying, right? Like you're surrendering this whole idea of who you are, and in order to do that, you're not sure if you're going to come back, right?
It feels like physical death. It really does. Yeah. So I like a lot of what you said, and I think it brings up some really interesting points that I'd like to talk about. So first of all, I'm going to posit a possibility. I don't know this to be true, but this is how I see things. I think that life is kind of like a school. We're here on Earth, and we have lessons to learn. Okay, and there's some point that we make conscious choices. Like we chose to learn certain lessons. You know, we have this body, we have our circumstances that help promote us to learn certain lessons, right? But then there's also some drivers, some reasons why it's hard for us to learn certain lessons. So in this way, I like to think of some simple Buddhist ideas. So there's three fundamental poisons in Buddhism. There's greed. I want more, right? There's a kind of avarice or hatred. I want less. And then there's also the fundamental ignorance to life, that we're all connected, that everything is fundamentally inseparable, right? So we have lessons to learn. We come into life with desires and things we don't like and a forgetting of this fundamental connectedness. And then we have these transcendent experiences where we start to wake up. Waking up can be small. It can be in the sense of you and I could have tea, and you could have a cup of tea, and in that moment you could be fully present, and all you are is having tea. And that's a kind of awakening. But it doesn't inform your life much. It doesn't move the needle much. Your habits very similar, life perspectives very similar. But it's refreshing because you're not worried about your day, you're just having tea. But then we have bigger awakenings, right? And can we have an awakening which I call deep enough and penetrating enough to kind of get to the 51-yard line? I think this is important. So I'm going to mention two Buddhist concepts before I talk about the plant medicine process. So in like Japanese Zen, they use words like kensho to be an awakening to the fundamental nature of reality, right? But that's not the same as nirvana. So people, when they say enlightenment, there's a confusion. You can wake up to the reality of existence, but it doesn't mean you've snuffed out your karma, which is this propensity to chase your likes and dislikes, right? So nirvana is when our likes and dislikes, it's not that we get rid of them and we don't have them. It's our propensity to grasp stops. And when our propensity to grasp stops, then they stop influencing us and we actually have true freedom. Because most of the time, we're pushed by our likes and dislikes and we have limited freedom, actually. So the 51-yard line is kind of like the point where it's, if I'm in Florida, so if I were swimming to Cuba, and if I got 51% there and I'm really tired, I'm not going to turn around and come back. It's farther for me to come back than to finish my journey to Cuba. So that means that there's an awareness and an acceptance of responsibility there's really only one thing we can control in this life, only one thing, and that's our reactions. So when we accept responsibility and stop blaming circumstances, the world, our upbringing, etc., then we start to really be very earnest about our practice, right? What it is to do our homework. And then things like plant medicine, ego death and existential crises, they don't have to happen under plant medicine, but they happen, it seems, more on plant medicine percentage-wise than in regular everyday life, because we really don't make the space for it. We're always just running around chasing our desires and distracted. But for example, ayahuasca, 5 or 6 hours, you're on the medicine. You can't get off that train. You're on that train. You're forced to work. And ego deaths are very interesting. I've thought a lot about them because they're very scary. I probably had like 15 under ayahuasca. And I've only really gone through the other end of it maybe 3 times. So that means 12 times I ran from it. Running from it means it's so physically scary, right? It does feel like you're going to die. And you're just reaching for anything to make the experience easier, right? You're reaching for help from different practitioners. You're doing other things, like you're trying to open your eyes or move away, or you're struggling so much that you'll purge and start to slowly cleanse a little bit of fear, and all of this will slowly happen. But 3 times, I remember very clearly, I was able to kind of relax into the experience. So things like you were mentioning, like Bufo, it really, those kinds of medicines are so strong, and they kind of like shoot you into this ego dissolution that you take the right dosage. You don't really have much choice. You kind of have to surrender because it's going to push you past the stratosphere, right? Ayahuasca, in my experience, I love it personally. It's kind of my main medicine because you can have that experience, but you also have time. You have 5 or 6 hours to work through all of these karmic underpinnings, also to have connection and relationship with spirit realms and things like that. So when this happens in ayahuasca for me, the first time I did a lot of yoga, and I thought that this process of like having a oneness experience that we often chase or want. So I would do yoga practices under ayahuasca. I'd meditate, and everything would kind of like rise up. Energy can be very strong, as you know, under medicine, right? When people talk about like kundalini and chi and this kind of real deep primal conscious energy, it can be very strong and sometimes overwhelming. But as it would rise up, I would work with it, and I couldn't quite like pop my top. I was like, man, I'm really stuck. And I tried it many times. And then one day it was kind of interesting. I was assisted. This was actually under mushrooms, and it was just a one-on-one with a beautiful medicine man that I work with sometimes. And because it was a one-on-one, I had a lot of personal care. He was there with me, and he wasn't distracted with lots of other people. And I just, as I was struggling so hard, something happened where I just gave up. And this giving up allowed this dropping of effort, and then a natural opening and an expansiveness of consciousness. Kind of this infinite consciousness where I wasn't trying to literally shoot out my head and literally poo out the head. I stopped trying at some point because I was pushing so hard. And as I stopped trying and I dropped everything, it naturally opened. That was more when I was very attached to mental ideas. I had this mental idea that I had to shoot out my head, and that was the way to have a oneness experience. A couple of other times under ayahuasca, it felt like physical death. Physical death, I had attachment to the body. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to stop breathing. So, and then you get nervous and the heart can palpitate and all these things. And you can have pressure in the chest or even pain, and you don't know what's happening. It feels like a heart attack. Sometimes the heart opening feels like a heart attack, whether it's under medicine or whether it's meditation or whether it's grief. It can feel like your heart is going to burst. So the first time I did a high dose of medicine, sometimes in ceremony, there's a lot of people, music and noise and all these things, and there can be distractions. But I wasn't concerned with all of those things. And I had done it several times. So I just let myself slowly calm down. And I had enough talk. I spoke to a lot of practitioners and talked to them about their ego death experiences. So I felt a little bit calmer. because I heard other people say what happened when they experienced it. Instead of their body physically dying, sometimes people literally pass out. But it was kind of like a hard reboot to the system, right? Like a reset, and then a reorganization of the psycho-spiritual human being, a reorientation, so to speak. So I had this in my mind. I was like, okay, you're not going to physically die. And I kind of soothed myself. I was just like, let go of fear. It's all right. And I felt this pressure in my chest and pain, and I was really scared. I was like, I'm going to stop breathing. This is going to suck. And I just said, just let it go. And at some point, something happened and the effort stopped once again. There's something interesting. There's an effort required to kind of get to the abyss, but then there's a relaxation of effort necessary to drop into the abyss. And the heart just expanded and opened so big. It was as if my heart was outside of my body. And if someone were to cross in front of me, they would touch it and pop it, and I would physically die. It was that vulnerable. And that experience I've had a couple of times, this opening. And now when medicine's really big, it still gets really big sometimes for me. And there can be helps and things I can do, like if medicine's really big, for some of your listeners, if they know things like rapé can really help to smooth the energies of medicine during ceremony. It can kind of harmonize it. It doesn't take you out of the medicine, but it can help harmonize so you're not hyper-focused on something. It can also give you some solidity and some grounding. So rapé, for me, is a beautiful medicine. I have a strong relationship with that, even though it's not psychoactive. But at the same time, if you always reach for tools, you're like, oh, this is the point where it's too strong, I'm scared, I'm going to do rapé, then you don't let yourself fully experience that. So for me at this point, I've done quite a few journeys. For ayahuasca, I'm like 60 plus. Instead of doing rapé when I'm scared and it's really big and it feels overwhelming, I wait till that's all past it. And then I use the medicine later as necessary, as opposed to trying to get out of a stuck place. So this feeling sometimes like being under medicine is, as you probably felt when you have possible ego death experiences, one of the ways it feels is like the sinking. You're just going to sink into this abyss, this collapse, right? And that one of the stronger times I've had that, and I wasn't able to complete it, I was in Peru on a dieta with Don Jose Campos. He's kind of a well-known name in the ayahuasca traditions. People know him. Like, he serves Sting. At this point, if you're serving Sting, I guess somebody knows who you are. But I was with him. In his tradition, there's no rapé. So dieta is a lot of medicine in a short period of time, 5 ceremonies in like 9 days, very, very clean eating, no like deodorant or toothpaste or anything, no scents, no salt, nothing like that. Very clean. So your body's very clean and open. So medicine can be very big. And you also do a master plant, like another non-psychoactive plant. I was working with Bobinsana at the time. But on the third ceremony, I had so much medicine. I think that I made a mistake because a buddy of mine it's called like a tambo. It's like where you sleep, you're separated. He had some electrolytes, and I went to visit him and had a little conversation, because most of the time, all day long, you're just basically by yourself, kind of communing with yourself. But he had some electrolytes, and he's like, you want some electrolytes? I said, sure, but I don't know if it's allowed or not, but they tasted kind of sweet. So I had some. I was, ooh, it's the first time I had any kind of flavor in like 2 weeks. So I think I had 2 cups, and my body had fuel in it. So when I did ayahuasca that night, I think it was the electrolytes. It had too much gas. So I did the ayahuasca, then it was boom, it was huge. So the medicine was so strong, and I got so physically hot, I thought I was going to literally instantaneously combust, and I didn't know what was going on. And I don't purge well. Like, I rarely purge, maybe 20% of the time, and most of the time I need rapé to help me purge. So I wouldn't purge. Purging can help relax the medicine. You get some of it out, right? And you can tie that into something like fear, and you can get some fear out, and it can shift your perspective. But I don't purge. Body's so hot. Talking to the medicine, I'm like, Mama Ayahuasca, I'm here to work, but can you take it down a notch? And the answer was, no, you're on the train. So because I couldn't release, I sank. And I got really sunk into a very dark, empty place. And I had meditation training, so I wouldn't follow the fear of the mind. I wouldn't follow it, but I had just literally a wall of blackness and fear, and just a few squiggles of thought. And I was in such trouble. I went up to Don Jose Campos. It's it's the jungle. It's black. There's like sounds of crickets and stuff, but it's black. And you got to make it from your seat all the way to the medicine man. And when you're under high dose ayahuasca and you can't see anything, that feels like a trip through the Sahara Desert just to get there. So I get there and I say, help. And he says, more ayahuasca? I was like, hell no. I collapsed. And I fell and my head hit his hand and he just held it and he started burping right away. And I understood that he's kind of clearing this energy off of me, right? It's coming from me through him and he's getting rid of it. And I fell at his feet and I literally held his foot for like 1 hour and he's playing Icaros, doing his thing. And he just let me. He just let me hold his foot as I'm going through this ego death experience. And there was a lady next to him. I don't know what she's from, some South American country. She's stroking my hair a few times because I'm really having a hard time. And this ego death, as I was in the blackness of just really raw fear and a few squiggles of the mind, and I couldn't relax into it. I couldn't do that last little bit of let go. I was stuck. And because I was so stuck, I went to the deepest part of my programming, which was my Christian programming. I hadn't thought about Christianity in like 20 years. But it came out, and I was like, holy shit, I'm going to have a come to Jesus moment in the middle of the Peruvian jungle grabbing this shaman's foot. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have a Christian conversion moment right now. And it was very confusing and scary. But I couldn't quite surrender to that. But I had this strong desire literally to crawl out for Christ. I was like, salvation, I need some help. I need a guide in this process. It's too much. So that process changed because he did a limpia on me, which is like a cleansing, and it kind of brought me out. It kind of perked up my energy enough to kind of get out of the hole. And it made me a little bit gun shy for the next day of ayahuasca. It made me gun shy for sure. But I think that when you asked earlier, you say, why is it that you get in your own way? Why is it that sometimes you don't treat your body well? Or you have these ideas about money and things that you do? I think that we have a misunderstanding of ego. We demonize it. We think it's bad. I think of ego as kind of like my big brother. It's been there to protect me my whole life, right? It protects me, and it adds fear to my life. That's true because it wants to keep me in safe places. But I'm a big boy now, and my big brother that helped me so much when I was young, I just want him to be my friend now. He doesn't have to be my guardian. So my brother used to I don't have a big brother. I'm the big brother, but if I did. So if he used to drive the car, he was in the driver's seat. I kind of say, hey, I'm okay now. I can drive. Why don't you just step over? I'm going to drive, and then you sit in the passenger seat. And if I need you, you're the best co-pilot. You're going to tell me when I need to be wary and when I need to actually have my guard up. But otherwise, I'm actually going to trust. And this is the thing that grows for me these days, is this trust, this faith, that there is a universal process of grace in our human experience that aids us, that helps us learn our lessons, to help us evolve as human beings, to work with this connection of all human beings and to work in service. So I think that ego death doesn't happen to everybody, and it's also not a necessity. But it does happen to people quite a bit in plant medicine experiences. And the plant medicine experience, I like to watch a lot of near-death experience accounts. And I'm really amazed by how similar ayahuasca journeys or any kind of plant medicine journey can be to a near-death experience process. If you look at different stages, how there can be a lot of similarities. If that's interesting for you, would you like to hear my thoughts on that for a second?
Yeah, I would love to hear.
So, the classic near-death experience, not that I've had one, so I can't say firsthand. So people die, they pop out of their body, they look down at their body, they might be disoriented and confused, they get some guides. Guides tell them it's going to be okay. And then they start to go through things like they have a life review, right? A life review of not just the bad things that they've done, but also what did it feel like for the people that they hurt? Not just that I had a fight with you, but what did you feel when we had the fight? Not just what I felt, but what did you feel? Their perspective. Like you, when you were talking about what is it like to feel like you were a Jew in the Holocaust, or all these other experiences that you mentioned, this whole walk a mile in another person's shoes is the only way we truly know. Gerald, do you have children?
I do.
Okay,
Between me and my wife, we have 10 children, so we've got a bundle.
wow, that's impressive. I have a child, and you can relate to what it's like before children and after children in the sense of what that feels like. Before it's just an idea, right? So intimately what that feels like. So for me in plant medicine experiences, when I experience all of these other lives, what is it like to be a worm in the ground? What is it like to be a black man who was a slave? What is it like to feel like any other life? Because it kind of feels like you're there to a degree, like you're in it, but you're also having a little bit of a first. My friend had a great explanation of the psychedelic experience and the therapeutic effect. He's like, it's a simultaneous first and third person experience. You live it, you're in it, but you're also standing back and watching it at the same time. And that, because of that, you have the ability to choose and navigate, right? You can change things. Whereas if you're only reliving it, you're stuck in it. You don't have that pullback experience. So you have a life review and also good things that you've done, right? And then you might have questions, and guides can give you answers. They can tell you things about the nature of life, your life, of reality, etc. Then you get closer to this light, this feeling of love, okay? And it feels so wonderful and all-encompassing. And then normally when you have near-death experiences, they don't really get past that, because if they go too deep into the light, then they can't come back, right? So they have to choose to come back to their body. But other people who have certain talents will say, you get to like the void where you kind of hit the cosmic washing machine, where your consciousness gets a little rinsed. So you have forgetfulness when you come into your next body. You don't remember all of those things, most people, what happened. So under medicine, most of the time the main reasons why people go are for some kind of therapeutic effect because of trauma, difficult things that have happened in their lives, right? All this energetic stuckness, okay, emotional and energetic stuckness. They need to do that homework. They need to see it, help clear it, help integrate it. And then as that happens, like when you do a lot of ceremonies, for me, I still always have that, but it's much less about that now. I don't have constant reflections on my life. And then as I start to see things, I see all kinds of things, so many spirits and guides and different things. And I'm learning, what does that mean? How do I navigate those? Which of those are beneficial? Which are not beneficial? How does one communicate? Those are things I'm not proficient in. I'm a student process. I'm learning and trying to understand and navigate the spirit realm here. And where you get answers, right? Clues, downloads, as people call them. But then there's all the love that we feel, this heart-opening experience of really feeling so much love. I'm sure that you've experienced multiple times in ceremony where your heart feels so big and there's so much love, especially when it's a good container. And of course, music can really help, and you're with other people that are really open and really genuine. So the communication is just immediate, right? You talk to somebody in a circle the next day and it's like, hey, how was that for you? It's immediate, like a Vulcan mind meld. It's not, hey, what do you do for a living, and blah, 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 and all those conversations. It's literally like, zip, where are you at, right? So in that way, I think it's quite interesting to experience kind of like a minuscule part of what a near-death experience can feel like due to medicine. People who've had both, there are near-death experiencers who've had both a near-death experience and do plant medicines, and they talk about how there's similarity, but a plant medicine near-death experience is like a fraction of what the actual near-death experience feels like. And when you talk about what does that mean, how does one integrate that when you do Bufo, right? When you have this boom, this expansiveness and ego dissolution, it's like getting a little bit closer to source. So you touched it a little bit, and it informs your life. It alters you a little bit, right? It changes you. But we still have these primary drivers of ignorance, greed, and hate. And these are the things that are pushing us into bad behavior. Not bad, but behaviors that are harmful for ourselves and others that we have to work on. Irregardless of the depth of our awakening, if we haven't cleaned this part, then we can get stuck in repetitious behavior.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. During the rest of the time we have, the next few minutes, I want to make sure that we just like really tune into a couple things. Number one, like core benefits for someone that wants to explore, let's say ayahuasca, because I know that's something that's been really impactful for you. I would love for you to share what have been some of the big benefits you've experienced that other people might. And then I want to talk about, like, based on your experience, especially with meditation and Oriental medicine as a background, what recommendations would you give to someone who wants to get the most out of an ayahuasca experience? Mm-hmm. And then talking about integration. So let's just first talk about, for you personally and for other people you've seen, like, what are the big benefits to exploring plant medicine, especially ayahuasca, as a tool to raise consciousness and access the higher mind?
Oh, so many. I would say that ayahuasca is beneficial for a large segment of the population. Not everybody, right? People can have deep psychological difficulties that should do other things before they should try medicine like ayahuasca. Of course, there are precautions. But when I do medicine, and when I've seen at this point thousands of people, I've been with thousands of people who have done medicine like ayahuasca. So the obvious visible things is that they learn to work with the difficulties of their life, right? The unresolved things, they work with those. And as they work with those, they learn skills. They learn skills like surrender, but they also learn skills like fortitude, right? And also they learn very important things like focus. Because sometimes when it's hard and life is getting crazy under ceremony, sometimes you have to have that focus, right? This ability to be present without being too knocked around. There's so many aspects of a human person that can be developed. So they start to get over their traumas. That's normally the initial thing that people do, right? Get over their traumas. Then they start working on all of these other things, like how is it that I can let go of fear more, right? How can I enhance courage, etc. And then all those medicines are serotonin upregulating. So they all give you the physical experience of love through the neurochemistry. So love is experienced, and you start to become more saturated with it. And the body becomes cleaner. You have to clean up before you do ayahuasca. You have to watch what you eat. There are certain restrictions. So you become cleaner and more open. And then with integration, how can we take these lessons and actually put them into real practice? This is very important. And I do think this leads into a conversation about meditation and Chinese medicine, because these are useful both before and after for integration tools, and also useful during. But one of the main benefits for me is just kind of like my floor is lifted. So if I get depressed, I get unhappy. But when I do, it's not like it was before. It's like if I hit rock bottom whatever number of years ago, now when I hit rock bottom, my bottom's up here. It's just not where it was. My floor is lifted a tremendous amount. And my tendency is more to look at love, to lean into that, to be open and to be inclusive, as opposed to be in the protective mode of the ego. So I've experienced what it's like to have less ego, and I would prefer that. So I lean in that direction now, whereas in the past, when life was very complicated, it was always more ego, more protection. So those are some of the benefits. when you look at the role of Chinese medicine specifically, because that has a lot of physical benefits, a lot of people, when they come in for plant medicine, it's not just spiritual healing. A lot of people are there for physical healing. They have disease, right? And they want some help with some real physical problems. So Chinese medicine is tremendous for that, for organizing, balancing, nourishing, and clearing the body. It can also do things like open blockages that you can experience in plant medicines. Like, you know what doctorcitos are?
No, I don't.
So doctorcitos, they're the little doctors. So they're little spiritual entities that come and they kind of perform surgery on you under medicine. It's a pretty common thing that happens. Okay, so you nod your head, so you might have experienced it, but that's what they call it in South America. So it's a common thing that happens under ayahuasca specifically, because that's most of my experience, where literally beings will come and they'll be like, poking and prodding these pain spots in you to try to open you up. So acupuncture can help with that, and deficiencies, herbs can help with that. And Chinese medicine can really help with the integration after that, because there's no one-stop shop. Like, you can't do ayahuasca. Let's say your issue is really like low testosterone. Ayahuasca is not really going to raise your testosterone. It can unblock things, help your gut, help clear things. And if you have blocked areas, it can help you use your testosterone better. But it can't really raise your testosterone. The substance doesn't do that. But things like Chinese herbs can actually do that. They can actually help out with testosterone without having to do hormone replacement therapy, which is risky, has risks. So there's nutritive, unblocking, health benefits of traditional Chinese medicine. But meditation, I really think, is kind of like the big elephant in the room. It's the obvious thing that we should all be doing, but is often quite ignored. So what if meditation, I just defined it as an unadulterated experience of yourself? Well, that doesn't sound bad, right? It sounds like something we should do. We should be with ourselves. I think it was Pascal that said all of the world's problems are really based on the fact that we're unable to sit still with ourselves. We just can't sit with ourselves. So meditation can provide a framework and a way to start to do rudimentary things like calm the mind, handle the influx of information that's happening and emotions that's happening. And it also starts to do deeper things, like starts to help you work through the attachments, mental, emotional attachments. So that's useful for stability before, because a lot of people have no practice. They just go in and do ayahuasca, and they're just blown away, and they're like, what is all of that? And they have nothing to grab onto. But it's okay, because even most people have no meditation experience when they do plant medicine experience, and it's perfectly safe. That's why ceremony is so important, set and setting, right? You have medicine people helping you. You have music, community, fire sometimes. All of these things can help you through this experience. And when I say through this experience, it sounds like it's always hard, but it's not. Some people have never had a hard time under plant medicines, and it's always been a really joyful, loving experience. I've met those people. But I would say it's just whatever's inside is going to come out. And for me, sometimes it's hard, but for me, honestly, these days, it's much less hard. I have a hard time 1 out of 5 now, whereas before it was like the first 20 were hard. Now there's much less. There's much less that are hard. But meditation can help you during, but very importantly, can help you integrate, because we feel the forces of our likes, our dislikes, and our fundamental ignorance of connection. We feel that impact all the time, and we're blown open through this experience of plant medicine. And meditation helps us see that, integrate that, find some stability, allow that process to continue to unfold. So we're not just like going from ceremony to ceremony to ceremony without integrating, hoping that we have enough big experiences that that's going to change our lives. It does change our lives in the sense that it can raise our floors, I see, which is good. But with the integration is where the real impact comes, right? People do ayahuasca. They want to get off alcohol. Some of them can right away. Some of them can't. And they have to work and integrate that process to let go of that craving more thoroughly. I've seen both, right? So I would urge your listeners and all humanity, honestly, I would say that plant medicine is really useful in my experience for a large portion of it. I would say meditation is useful for everybody, but it can be very challenging for some people. So they need people who can sometimes give them simple practices. Everybody says, oh, meditation's so hard. I can't do it. I can't keep my mind on one thing, these kinds of things. So they can do other bodily practices, yoga, qigong, something that doesn't require so much stillness to give them some baseline. And also take care of our bodies. Chinese medicine is one way to take care of our body. Our body informs the mind, right? When I was a younger man, I always wished I met the really wise guru who would be like the proper doctor and say, oh, okay, Gene, you need to do da 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 da, and then you're going to get the da, and I'm going to be with you the whole time. But I never had that. I had a lot of different really good teachers that knew lots of different things on different areas, and they all helped me in different aspects of my life. But what I see is the totality of what most people need. They need a mental practice. They need a bodily help, and they also need some way to unblock themselves. And plant medicines are amazing. People don't have patience, right? They're not going to go to the temple for 20 years. But just for a couple plant medicine experiences, they can get a tremendous glimpse of the nature of themselves, the nature of reality, of their capacity, of their ability to really plug into life.
So appreciate all those points and conversations, because I think it's a holistic experience of well-being and healing and restoring our souls back to this harmony within. I mean, that's really what we're strong advocates of. Even with this podcast, I think there's times for the recreational use of these substances. I think that's fine in certain occasions, and I think set and setting is what creates the space for the accelerated healing and advancement of our soul's consciousness and the releasing of what no longer serves and the healing of our traumas. And so all of these things that you're talking about like managing the wellness of our mind and like really tuning into our body and what it needs. And then the integration practice through the plant medicine experiences is so important. We did a recent conversation as one of our shows with John Assaraf, who is this amazing thought leader that, has, helped so many people in this idea of neuropsychology and transformation of the mind and helping people manifest what they want. But his whole conversation was the importance of the 3 to 6 months after plant medicine experience in terms of how do you take the insights and the wisdom and how do you actually bring them into practice within your life. And I love your thoughts in terms of, making sure that we build in meditation practices, make sure that we build in the practices within our body so that we can, really become the expanded version of ourselves through this process. So grateful for this conversation, brother. Really grateful for your wisdom and your experience and your perspective. I would love for you to share, is there anything that we or this audience can do to support you? Like what's alive in your world and your heart? And is there any way that people can learn more from you or support you in your cause or mission?
Well, thank you for asking. I think that all of us, as we're working together to try to hopefully be of service, right? We all have our own specific needs, but we all have our own specific geniuses. You have this wonderful podcast. I have specific skills, and I work a lot with the body and the mind in different ways. If people are called to those things and they're interested in those things, our basic practice website is roothealingwellness.com, and we help people through Chinese medicine and functional medicine. I do love the teaching of things like meditation, and I teach meditation every Wednesday, and I teach that also on Zoom. There's no cost for that if people want to do that. I have some students that I do teach. I think that the mentorship is particularly useful because this kind of like direct contact, or as close as you can get to direct, is very useful because you see what it is, like the human being in front of you. You look at their eyes. It's not just talk about theory. It's like, how are they putting it into practice? What is really moving their lives? And I find that tremendously rewarding. So I would say if those things call to people, they can just basically contact my office through roothealingwellness.com. But whatever it is that moves you, that you feel a passion for, that makes you feel more connected into life, I'd say explore that. And if you're lucky, In Korean, the word is called inyan. Inyan is like a karmic affinity. People are brought together by certain kind of attractions. And if you have karmic affinity with certain people, your life can really blossom. They can be important signposts in your life, guides in your life. And it can often feel kind of metaphysical. You kind of meet somebody and you're like, hey, have we met before? You get this kind of experience. And then sometimes these people really advance your process. So if this provides use, this podcast touches anybody out there, gives them more clues to something or makes them feel closer to something or more genuine or authentic, which I think is really the first step. Can we just become genuine and authentic with ourselves? Then I would say that it's provided some good to the world. And you've been tremendous to talk to. You're really a enjoyable person to spend some time with. So I thank you.
Thank you so much. So give us like one final thought, either an action step or a thought of inspiration that you want to leave as kind of the final note for everyone that's listening right now.
I think there's an old Tibetan proverb. They say when you come to two roads in the forest or whatever, take the harder one. So just don't be scared. If fear is your main motivation for not doing something, then it's possible that you need to explore that. Don't be scared. When you die, you're going to have to see it all anyway. Nobody gets a pass. Might as well do it now.
Thank you so much, Gene. And thank you so much to everyone that's part of this tribe. We just invite you to continue to tune into Psychedelic Sex and the Superconscious as we continue to unfold these heartfelt conversations of how we can access the higher mind and show up more powerfully in our life. And please join our tribe and be part of this ongoing conversation. And just remember that this is your life. So make it legendary.
Thank you, legendary explorers, for joining us on this cosmic journey today.
Your curiosity fuels our exploration of psychedelics, sex, and the superconscious.
If you're hungry for more, dive into our website and connect with us on social media. All the links are in the show notes.
And stay tuned for our next mind-expanding episode. We can't wait to talk to you again in our next adventure.
Until then, remember, this is your life. So,
make it legendary.